from Manchester, as was stated, as far as I know, it wasn't appealed. But I could say that if you were to go in there with a can of paint and do that, that's one thing. If you're going to do it with chalk, that's another. It would really depend upon the nature of the activity and how the courts decide to handle it. But that's just sort of the general answer. If you wanted to direct more questions, I would suggest you probably want to talk to the police chief.
Chief, do you have anything more to add? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kenneth Neal, Police Chief. I would defer a lot of my comments, and they would echo exactly what Attorney Mullins has stated here this evening. Criminal mischief needs to be interpreted based upon the activity that occurred. Now, certainly, as we look at like behaviors throughout the state, trying to make those decisions, we do look at that Manchester case because it's the preeminent case of its kind at this point in time. So we would defer to that as a guide as far as how we make a decision on whether or not it was criminal mischief or not according to the state law.
Any questions for it? Thank you. Okay. Councilor Jones.
Yeah, I think we just heard, I think Councilor Filio is talking about a much bigger picture than what we're hearing tonight. Councilor Filio never mentioned an area, he never mentioned downtown, he never mentioned Central Square, he never mentioned chalk. He mentioned graffiti, which is a city-wide problem. Graffiti, nothing spells the demise of a city more than graffiti. And you see it everywhere. You drive down Ralston Street, you see the uglification of Ralston Street just driving down there. You go out to Wheelock Park and look at you see the graffiti out there by the horseshoe pits out there. I see Mr. Croto here on the side of his store. Sometimes we see graffiti. That's what needs to be addressed, I think. This chalking part is just a way smaller part of that. I think it couldn't hurt to ask, to research, and just find out what the options are to deal with this.
When you say this, I'm sorry to interrupt.
To deal with
graffiti in general, what you were just talking about, not chalk.
Yeah, and I think that's part of, and
Maybe
Councilor Philo can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's part of what he's asking for. It was the public tonight that brought up chalking and downtown. Councilor Filio never brought that up at all in his letter, and that's an important part of having a safe, clean city, and a city with a bright future and with economic development. I don't see how it could hurt to ask staff to research and just tell us our options. What can you do? Can you allow it in certain places? Can you ban it in certain places? Can you look at the content? It couldn't hurt for us to find out about that. If we hear about that and we hear something we like, then we could ask staff to draft an ordinance, which would be a public process. Once again, where everyone would have, once that ordinance is drafted, the public would have a say in the content of that ordinance. And if we like the ordinance, or we can change the ordinance, amend the ordinance, and then we would send it on to City Council. Right now, I think we should go with Councilor Fiddler's recommendation, at least ask for the research.
Councilor Manuel?
I agree with Councilor Jones. I think it's a great idea. And I would be interested to hear from, I don't know if it's Public Works or it's Parks and Recreation, but I would be interested in the cost to the city of the graffiti. I know we have the nice brand new North Bridge, and I don't think it was there a week. I don't even think it was completed, and there was graffiti on there. So I would be interested in knowing the cost as part of that research.
I would point out a number of years ago, there was a spike in graffiti activity in the city. The police department, public works department, parks and rec, and our chief code enforcement officer and assistant city manager, Med Kopczynski, did a lot of work in helping businesses deal with how to remove graffiti, how to create more preventive measures with certain materials that are more or less, well, I wouldn't say completely graffiti-proof, but would be easier to remove. There was a significant cost, and that is a crime, it's a criminal mischief, and unfortunately, that type of activity, spray painting on walls and things like that, and the North Bridge, as you mentioned, are things that are done under cover of night and hard to catch somebody in the act. I do know that they did arrest a man from Bennington, Vermont, because the police, doing their due diligence, discovered that there was sort of a tagging clique that liked to brag about their exploits. And there's a young man from Bennington who was caught and arrested, and I believe he did at least pay a fine, if not spend time in jail. It is an ongoing issue with the graffiti, but the city has been responding, and I'm sure how much it's cost, at least a reasonable estimate, would be readily available already. Councilor O'Connor, did you have something?
I do. I just wanted to say, Councilor Filio's letter, it's my understanding, when I read it, part of that does fall under the graffiti with chalk, not just permanent graffiti, but with paint or some kind of marking that does not wash off. I just want to reiterate, we do have a state law, 634-2, criminal mischief. Roman numeral 3 talks about all other criminal mischief as a misdemeanor, class B, where it's not, it's an arrestable offense, but again, there's going to be discretion in some of those cases. So we have to be, I just want to be careful with the, going forward with another ordinance or talk about another ordinance where we have state law that's in place.
Are you saying you're okay going forward, asking staff to do more research, or you're...
I'm okay with more research, more time, more research, so we can find out. We have, the Keene police and the prosecutor for the city consider chalking criminal mischief if they would go forward with something like that, if there was a case. And again, it depends on, there's a lot involved there. Each case is different.
Councilor Randall, you
Well, I guess in listening to everybody, there were a couple themes that jumped out to me that I almost got more confused as we went on. And that is art versus graffiti and temporary versus permanent. So it seems like a really, seems really complicated to me, and I'm wondering how, maybe you could ask staff how they feel about tackling some of those issues. If they would see that as part of the research, I guess is my question.
Well, do you have a particular staff member you want to ask that question to?
Leave it up to staff to decide which one.
Well, you have to call on somebody.
Oh,
Or
I
someone
do?
has to raise their hand, that's how it works. If you want to ask that question,
Okay.
throw a dart, there's a number.
Throw a dart, city manager?
So the question is, how do we proceed from this point relative to staff research, and what extent should that research cover?
Yes.
That's ours.